Nedim Gürsel. Psaní je mu...
Nedim Gürsel. Writing is perhaps only an illusion, but it is also a jump into emptiness and defiance to death. Writer, literary critic Nedim Gürsel was born in 1951 in Gaziantep in Turkey. For his first book, The First Woman, he was awarded the Impactive Prize for promoting Turkish Greek culture understanding and for insulting religion in The Daughters of Allah, for which he was recently acquitted in an Istanbul court. Nedim Gürsel has become a nightmare for all ill rulers. Gürsel, after the coup d'etat in France in 1971, left Istanbul for Paris, where he finished his doctoral dissertation in 1979. The topic of this work was Nassim Hikmet and Louis Aragon. After another coup d'etat in 1980, he decided to leave Turkey again, and today he lectures on the contemporary Turkish literature at the Sorbonne and is director of research of the Centre National de la Recherche Scientifique. Nedim Gürsel was named Chevalier des Arts et Lettres by the French Minister of Culture. Nedim Gürsel lives in Paris, but goes to Istanbul quite frequently.
Bonjour.
Good afternoon. Before I read a short passage in Turkish from my book, The Conqueror, I would like to thank Michael March for giving me this opportunity to come back to Prague, to this extremely beautiful city, which I had known before my first trip. And in fact, I have mentioned this city also in one of my books. Now, speaking about fiction, that is, speaking about my novels and about fiction as such, I always write in my mother tongue, that is in Turkish, although I have been living in France for a long time now. My essays, most of them at least, are written in French, however. This is the language of Descartes, which sometimes find it quite difficult to cope with the very lyrical passages. I will now read a short passage in Turkish. I want you to listen to the very sound of my mother tongue.
Şimdi güvertede oturmuş boğaz kıyılarına bakarken yine denizi düşünüyor. Bir yuva kurup çoluk çocuğa karışmayı, Venedik'te bir başka iş tutmayı tasarlayacak yerde artık orta yaşı çoktan geride bıraktığını, önünde pek de fazla zaman kalmadığını anlayarak külahını, yoksa şapkasını mı demeliydim, önüne koyup arpacı kumrusu gibi yaşamına yeni bir yön vermek için düşünüp taşınacağı yerde, Nefeli'nin kırmızı ağzı, keskin dişleri, diri memeleri düşüyor aklına. Denizin onu yine bir kadına, bu kez kadınların en tutkulusuna, en cömertine götürdüğünü düşünüp gülümsüyor. Trabzon yolunda Galata'nın nasılsa şarap kokmayan nemli bir mahzeninde tanımıştı Nefeli'yi. Bir dukaya hemen anlaşmışlar. Limana inen dar sokakların bitimindeki ağaçlı küçük alana bakan odada İsa Kulesi'nin taş duvarlarına karşı gün ağarıncaya dek sevişmişlerdi. Belli ki Nefeli çok tat almıştı ondan. Yoksa bir dukaya anlaştığı müşteriyi sabaha dek tutmaz, her zaman yaptığı gibi üstünkörü yattıktan sonra sokağa, çamurda avlayan köpeklerin arasına koyverirdi. Antonio, günde en az birkaç erkekle sevişen bir fahişeyi bile baştan çıkarmış olmanın gururuyla gülümsüyor. Nefeli'yi Trabzon'a demir almadan önce bıraktığı yerde eliyle koymuş gibi bulacak bu akşam. Bu kez para vermeden sevişecek onunla. Uzun süredir birbirlerine hasret kalmış iki sevgili gibi murat alıp murat verecekler. Ve sırılsıklam aşık olacak Nefeli'ye. Bu kadının namuslu geçinen birçok kadın gibi ruhunu bit pazarında satmadığını, gövdesini teslim ettiği erkeklere gönlünü de teslim etmediğini biliyor çünkü. Nefeli'nin altında inleyişini, ona sarılıp önce sevgilim, sevgilim derken birden sırtını tırmalamaya başlamasını, boğam benim, Venedikli azgın boğam diye haykırışını ömrünün sonuna dek unutamayacak. Antonio Akdeniz limanlarını dolaşa dolaşa Rumca öğrendiğine hiçbir zaman o anki kadar sevinmemişti. Hiçbir zaman Nefeli'nin ağzından kırmızı ve derin ağız boşluğundan çıkan Tavrakimu sözcüğünün büyüsüyle kendinden geçip o güzel coşkuyu yaşamamıştı.
Good evening. I'll be reading from the novel in Czech now. There are not many people here present tonight, which is a great pity. It seems that there are hardly any readers, and there are also few writers. The Czech public has not been paying much attention to this festival. Mrs. Brtníková was telling me that 100 tickets had been sold. So those of you sitting at the back, why don't you move forward? We want to make sure that Mr. Gürsel will have only nice memories of Prague. Nedim Gürsel, the Conqueror. Now, while he is looking over the shores of the Bosphorus, he thinks of the sea instead of thinking of getting married and having children, having another job in Venice, or realizing that there is no more time to live ahead. His thoughts return to the red mouth of Nefeli, her sharp teeth and firm breasts. He smiles with the idea that the sea will again take him to the woman who is the most passionate and generous of all women. One of the most passionate and one of the most generous of them all. He had met Nefeli on the way to Trabzon in a cellar in which somehow there was no smell of wine. They had quickly agreed on the price of 1 ducat, and in a narrow room on a street near the dock overlooking the small square next to the stone ball of Christ's Tower, they made love until dawn. Obviously Nefeli enjoyed the night, otherwise she would never let her customer pay just 1 ducat and stay with her until the morning. It was not as she always does, making love, cursorily leaving him in the muddy street among the barking dogs. Antonio smiles with the joyful pride of a man who tempts a whore, who making love with more than one man in a day. He would find Nefeli again tonight, where he left her before leaving for Trabzon. This time he would make love with her without paying money. And although contemplating being away from each other for a long time, they would enjoy themselves. He knows that this woman does not sell her soul as a righteous woman, never gives her soul to a man having her body. He would never forget her moan, and then her embracing him with the words, my darling, and then suddenly raking his back and crying out. He will never forget his shrieks, my wild bull of Venice, how happy he was as he had learned Greek. He loved the word tebrakimo coming out from Nefeli's mouth. A lot of women had walked through his life. He made love to some of them all night. With some he made love for a very short time, in the time that would have sufficed to drink a glass of wine. And then the following day he would set on a journey. would always make fun with other women. He was always taken from one town to another, on his boat from one woman to another. He was always trying to buy the most expensive clothes, the most expensive jewelry. He always enjoyed spicy food, but he'd always managed to get rid of all the dirt of his nights. He loved embracing women. Every single time he raised his glass of wine, he felt an immense thirst. The more he made love, the more he felt thirsty. How could he have known that it would be so difficult to forget her, knowing that the dark-haired woman of Byzantine was unlike any other woman? Even if they had met again, he would fall in love with her, and her hair would remain untidy in bed, her legs stretching out during her orgasm, her resistance like a rebellious river, and her naked body, especially that. And now, while he was watching the Bosphorus and sitting on a box in front of the captain's room, he had no doubt that one day her arms would embrace him like the insuperable walls surrounding Constantinople. After a month, when they reunited again tonight, his life would change as well, and they will never leave each other again. This vessel of Venice, with the flags of the San Marco Republic, decorated with the figures of lions, sailed from the Bosphorus to the Sea of Marmara. Now, having rounded a spit of land, Captain Antonio's good luck also changed. Antonio was suddenly startled, like someone waking up from a bad dream. He stared at the towers appearing suddenly in front of him. First, he could not believe his eyes. It had not been such a long time that he had sailed on the Black Sea. At that time, there was only a demolished church with its garden covered with weedy grass on this side. The trees had blossomed and spring had returned. The sunlight was playing on the water in front of the castle at the other shore and on the barrels of the cannons, rusty because of disuse. The sun illuminated the guns of the defense that protected the dock, the cormorants diving into the sea and emerging, and the white wings of the seagulls turning round the mast with screeches. Everything was peace and harmony, all of them, the castle, guards, sea, the seagulls, were nicely wrapped within the softness of spring. Looking up at the hills of the left shore, beautifully ornamented with flowers, he thought that if one day war would break out with the Turks, the Bosphorus could never be closed for sea traffic. Even if it could be closed, the commercial vessels of Venice would continue to sail as they had in the past. Frankly, peace was so nice. The Venetian captain was not afraid of either dangerous pirates or wild worms, but war was different. At war, people were dying, ships were sinking, cities and castles were being burnt and destroyed, women were being raped, and babies were being slaughtered, and blood was flowing in streams. Perhaps it was possible to find one who enjoyed killing people and accepted this senseless killing as a great virtue. Perhaps war was a necessity, fighting a question of honor, even an art. But it was not natural. In Antonio's eyes, the only thing that was natural was the foam of the waves, the taste of women and wine, and friendship of the people. Of course, people had come into the world to enjoy living, not to kill each other. And now, on a November day, as the cutthroat appeared in his way like a dragon blocking the passage, this was not a good sign. He suddenly rushed out of his captain's perch and warned the sailor tending the rudder. There was a flurry and rush around the ship. The crew kept on rowing, and the master sailors pulled on the ropes. Antonio's voice ordering all sails hoisted was drowned out by the incredible thunder of cannonballs, something had never seen before. The cannonball had landed next to the ship, the port side of it, after flying over the mast. Antonio realized that it was not a joke. Anticipating a second firing, he took over the rudder. They had to escape the serious misfortune and reach Galata as soon as possible. Not just because they had to deliver the goods for the emperor's army, but in order not to be caught by Turks. Luckily, wind and current were on their side. Not just wind and current, but also God. God and Mother Mary. Suddenly he felt God, whose name he never mentioned even in difficult times, with him even beyond this inside his soul. It was such a trembling and shuddering coming from God. It was God. It was not the sea cracking and splitting, not the sky thundering, but a deep look into the golden mosaic of the San Marco Basilica. He remembered the words of Nephele, "You Romans are worse than Turks. Neither your beliefs nor your traditions are the same as ours. Also, your views of Christ are so odd." He had said to Nephele that he had no time for God and asked her to take the icon of the Virgin from her bedside. Now he felt contrite for his blasphemous reaction to the icon. Perhaps this was the cause of this misfortune. But then he immediately comes to himself again. In order to encourage the crew, rowing with great effort, he shouts, "Come on, my lions, if you reach Galata, it will be a feast for you." But once he said the word feast, the second cannonball hit the center of the ship, and the centermast came down like a tree struck by lightning, and Antonio managed to jump over into the sea from the captain's perch.
Guards fished Antonio Rizzo from the water along with the ship's secretary Niccolo, the only son of Domenico Nicodemastri, and 15 crewmen, delivering to the commander Firuzaga. Following the order of Sultan, they were sent to Adeni. As they were taken there, they were hungry and tired, and suddenly they felt a glimmer of hope. Despite of the fact that the Turks took them away, their lives were not in danger. Moreover, they had hoped that perhaps the embassy of Venice in Constantinople, they sent Fabrizio Corna as messenger, and they felt they were enjoying the protection of the Venetian Republic, which was the most powerful state in the Eastern Mediterranean, and that made them comfortable. However, having seen the terrible anger in the Sultan's look, Captain Antonio realized it was the end of the road. He had heard that Mehmed was a young and passionate Sultan, but he never thought he would have such a deep and controlled anger coursing through him. In front of him, it appeared, was the head of Ottoman Empire, but a wild panther ready to attack its prey, or a falcon whose claws he would not escape. The Sultan looked at the chained slaves. His pale face changed colors. The Sultan's gaze stopped on him. He wanted him to come nearer. Antonio hesitated for a while. He looked at Mehmed's face, which turned red with rage. His lips were trembling. His eyes were shining brightly under his white turban. Like a snorting bull, the Sultan charged. "Were the gods in your ship for the army of Constantine?" The captain nodded and never looked at the Sultan's face again. Had he done so, he would have noticed that Sultan became calm, and there was a smile on his face. He would have been able to see that. While he was separated from the others and taken away with a shove, he looked behind and saw that Niccolo was being freed from his chains, and Mehmed was showing special interest in stroking the head of the secretary. He bemoaned he was not as young as Niccolo, his birdless youth. But quickly he erased his tasteless thoughts from his mind. He left the court with pride. On the same day, they took Antonio to Dimetoka with the Sultan. When they arrived in the city, they learned that Fabrizio had come earlier than them and asked to meet with the Sultan. And he smiled, thinking that he saved his life from the hands of the angel of death once again. The following morning, Antonio was jailed, they unfastened his chains. They asked him to lie him down. They asked and tied up his hands. As Antonio was lying helpless, something stirred in the camp. The soldiers began to laugh loudly and make jokes. Soon after, he saw a janissary was approaching with an extremely long stake resembling a lance. At the top of the stake there was a greased iron point and semicircular wooden collar. The gypsy tore off Antonio's wrinkled, greased pants, nimbly unfastened the buttons of his blue shirt and put it on himself. The silk shirt was too big for him. He rolled up its sleeves and dragged the shirt inside his pants. He smiled and yawned, showing his toothless mouth. Now he could start his job. Antonio was lying down on his stomach with his pants torn from the back, exposing his backside, and all sorts of bad things were passing through his mind. He could still not understand what they were planning for him. He had never thought of death. But suddenly, it became clear to him that he would die soon. He again met the face of God, this time not from the mosaic from the Basilica San Marco, but now God was looking from the small Byzantine church, which he frequently passed as he was walking along the walls of his evening strolls out of the palace. In this depiction, Christ held his hands open on both sides of himself. The Virgin Mary was on his right, St. John on his left. His eyes were merciless. A river of fire flowed from his toe, along which the damned were dragged towards hell. Strangely, the angel with blue wings who rolls up and fills the sky with the sun and moon was not in her usual place. The men in the river of fire were all stark naked, and they carried heavy chains around their necks, and the fire that burned and wounded their bodies was unique in the world. He wanted to cross himself, but he remembered that his hands were tied. While he turned his face back, trying to say his last wish, to get his hand loosened, the commander of the Imperial Guards drove the stake into his anus. At that moment he was confused about what it was. He put his face, crumpled with pain, to the ground and started crying to God to take his soul as soon as possible. As the gypsy drove the stake with another hammer blow into his body, he felt he would choke out the intensive, indescribable pain. Taking care of his internal organs and checking the direction of the iron stake, the gypsy struck the third blow. Antonio lost control of himself. The sweat poured from his forehead in streams, softening the frozen earth. He had been so solid in the morning. He does not remember the sequel. When he regained consciousness, he found himself like a fly sitting on a stake that extended through his body and coming out from his right shoulder. Half conscious, he hung there at the level of a lance and slightly bent forward with the point of the stake driven into the ground. At first he felt a terrible thirst. As soon as the fog of his eyes disappeared, he saw that the tent had been taken away and nobody was around. At the edge of the road leading to Constantinople, under the blue sky, he was alone. Nobody passed along the road, neither on foot nor on horseback. It was nearly dark. Before him, the poplars were rustling from the edge of the planted fields. Antonio thought that the peace was over, and now the harvest would no longer be feasible in the immense land of Thrace. The cannonballs that sunk his ship would soon start to strike the walls of Byzantium. His body was now numb, and his hands and feet started to become cold. For some reason, he didn't feel too much pain. It seemed that the stake was part of his body, even if a physical peculiarity. Before long, it would be a difference he could accept. Life was so close that he could touch it. The land, the poplar trees, the wind and the sun, everything had its own color, its own reality. Suddenly he was gripped with a longing for the sea. He imagined himself entering the port of Galata with his ship. He lowered the sails and approached the dock. The city with its palaces, rolls, columns and domes gleaming under the sun was like a new bride, shining brilliantly in front of him. From the distance he saw Nepheli coming to him with the purity of a virgin. She carried a golden ring in her hands and whispered to him, "I know you are married to the sea, but I put the ring you threw into the water on my finger." Now he was in Venice, and looking at the city through the bulwarks of the ship, which was covered with gold. They moved alongside the Doge's palace after passing through the channel. The streets had been filled with dissolute crowds going to the entertainments wearing brightly colored clothes. The gondolas were going down and coming up like cormorants on the water. The ringing of the bells mixed with the ballads of sailors, smells of spices. He stood alone in the red velvet captain's cockpit, sailing through without touching the calm water like a mythical bird. Instead of joining the crowds and following the women, he was sailing towards the castle of San Andrea on this great ship of state. Soon after, having left the poor fisherman's hut where he was born, he stared out to the sea from the front of the Lido. There he threw his golden ring. He shouted, "Sponsamus te mare nostrum." The wind carried away his words to distant places, even beyond the immense deserts described by Marco Polo. Antonio became increasingly and intolerably thirsty. His body burned with a consuming fever. He saw the blood-red sun behind the poplars gradually sinking. Evening was coming to earth. Suddenly he felt near fainting. The red of the sun expanded into a fire, consuming his body. After that, everything disappeared, everything dissolving into a dark, empty void. As Captain Antonio Rizzo died on the stake piercing through his body, he could not see that Fabrizio Corner and the Byzantine secret secretary were coming from the court, coming back to Constantinople from an audience with Sultan Mehmed.
The Queen.
Thank you. Thank you. Now we shall have a short conversation following this reading. We have listened to a passage from the Conqueor. The translation is currently being prepared. This book is considered to be the very best work of Mr. Gürsel. I would now like to ask Mr. Gürsel a couple of questions that are somewhat related to his work. Mr. Gürsel, your novel, The Conqueror, was written about 15 years ago. Since then, you have published another book called The Turban of Venice. In Turkish, this was called Reseme Dünya. And more recently, in 2008, you published another novel called Our Daughters. This novel has been published in Czech, and it has been received with a lot of attention here. Because the topic of that novel is religion. And in fact, in the novel, you expressed your relation to religion and also to your own life that has not developed in a linear manner. I would like to ask you how you see your career, your life that spanned the very left at the very beginning. Most Turkish intellectuals did start on the very left. And then you came to a situation when you separated yourself from this ideology, and in your latest book called The Devil and the Communist, you also speak of some communist idols. Sorry, it's called Devil, Angel and the Communist. I don't know whether we can speak about the time of accounting. In fact, you want me to talk about my life, about my career. This is an extremely vast topic. Of course, I could reflect on this in connection with this most recent book, which is called The Devil, the Angel and the Communist. This is a book that was published in Turkey. And in this novel, I tried to evaluate, as it were, the 20th century in political terms. It's not so much about my life. The novel is, or the plot is situated in Berlin, in a city that saw a major tragedy of the 20th century. The 20th century, of course, started with the onset of communism. We had the October Revolution, is the following uprising. Then we saw a similar uprising in Berlin. And then in 1989, Berlin saw the fall of the Berlin Wall, and that was the end of communism. So it is this city, the city of Berlin, that is truly symbolic in this respect. And thanks to Nedim Hikmet, the great Turkish poet, or through his work rather, I tried to look at some of the ideologies that marked the 20th century, be it totalitarian ideologies or other ideologies. The main character of the book is a homosexual who loves one of the very famous Turkish poets who was a communist. That's why I speak of the angel and the devil. The novel is rather complicated. I wouldn't say that it's about these two characters only. But what is important here is the questions, all the questions related to the generation of Nedim Hikmet that launched a fight of some sort that usually ended badly. And I'm trying to ask questions about these intellectuals, about the different ways of thinking. They speak about Islam, they speak about the Prophet. They also, I mean, the story is told by a child, and it's a novel that again questions faith and sees communism as a faith. Thank you very much for your answer. Perhaps my question was formulated too vaguely, but my feeling is that your career, your work, as it is portrayed in Allah's Daughter and in this latest novel, The Devil, the Angel and the Communist, go back to what we were discussing yesterday when we were talking about Cold War. What do you think about the Cold War? You are a true expert on Central European history and current situation, and that is why you can really comment on what has been going on in this country, because for us Nazim Hikmet was somebody who was promoting communism, although he was a wonderful poet, but he was somewhat discredited in this country because he had associated himself with the Soviet communism. He emigrated to the Soviet Union, and we got to know him through Russian translations. What I'm trying to say is that our development was reverse to that of yours, because we were hoping that communism would fall sooner or later, and that we would see the day when the situation would be what I would call normal. While you believed that there would be a better world, you believed in those ideas that in fact were discredited in this country by the communist coup d'etat and also the Russian or Soviet invasion. And in the end, at the end of the day, the disillusion is almost identical. That is, your disillusion is identical with our disillusion that followed after the years of hope. And now we are meeting on the same platform. We know that the ideas of the 20th century are dead, and that all we can do is start looking again for a way out of this situation. And it is in your books, in particular in Allah's Daughter and also in this most recent novel that we are talking about here, I see this, what I call accounting, and this attempt at somehow cope with this disillusion. Can you comment on what I've just said?
La désillusion est là, elle est commune à...
Yes, of course. There are disillusions, and they concern the whole of our generation. And in Turkey, we perceived the then Soviet Union and the communist bloc in a different way than these countries were regarded by the intellectuals in those countries concerned. It has to be said, however, that when I started writing my first short stories, that was the end of the 60s, when I was in my 20s. And as I have said, I would never doubt that that was the most beautiful thing in a man's life. And after the putsch in 1961, I was 20, and the prosecutor wanted to sentence me to 7 years of imprisonment for an article which I published in a literary magazine, and it was entitled The Friends of the People, and it referred to Gorky and Lenin. So in the recent history, we experienced military coup which put an end to representatives of left-wing movements. For example, Nazim Hikmet was imprisoned for a number of years before he left for Moscow. And I do agree with you in saying that he remained faithful to his ideals throughout his life. yes, he was in the opposition. He was against Stalinism after the 20th Congress, when Khrushchev came to power, when his report was published in 86. So he was an orthodox communist in a way, but that did not prevent him from writing great books, books which also refer to your city. You said that you got to know him as someone he was forced upon you via his Russian translations, but he knew your poets such as Nezval and others. But I'm not here to talk about Nazim Hikmet, rather because I wrote a study about Nazim Hikmet, which was very thorough and which focused on his poetry. I should mention here that he was very innovative in his poetic work. Nazim Hikmet always called on the tomorrows, on the mornings of tomorrows, and he was a messenger of the bright tomorrows that awaited us. And that is why I referred to him, and that is why I decided to devote one of my novels to him. I dedicated the novel to Nazim Hikmet, who kept promising a better tomorrow to us, but that never came. Most wrote that 21st century will either be spiritual or will not be at all. And you were right in saying that 20th century's ideologies are dead. But at the moment we're witnessing a rise of various religious dogmas which are rooted in politics, and that's not good. So the disillusionment remains, and when looking for a way out of this situation, well, it's not easy to find an escape from this situation. That is why the narrator of the novel, who retells his life, does not see an escape, does not see a solution. Thank you very much for this answer. I'd like to ask my last question, which is related to it and which is clearly related to religion and the abuse thereof. One of the main reasons why you've been invited to this year's festival is its motto, "Some like it hot." Because in your novels, you do not avoid hot topics. And perhaps the hottest of topics that one can encounter could be seen in your novel, The Daughters of Allah. Is our view of religion, but from my point of view, this is a deeply spiritual point of view, deeply spiritual perspective, yet that perspective had been twisted, and that resulted in your arrest and a trial. But you answered my question referring to the fact that the disillusionment of the 20th century turned into the abuse of religion at the beginning of the 21st century. That's why I'd like to ask you whether you believe that this is something that could be overcome, that this is something that's only transient, and whether the Muslim countries can ever find an escape from the evil of abuse of religion, and how do you see the situation in Turkey vis-à-vis religion? I'd just like to say a few words about the trial that I was subject to. There would have been no trial if that happened 20 years ago. It was a new phenomenon, in fact, because writers in my country were persecuted. However, we're in a different country. We a candidate country for the European Union. We'd like to become EU members. However, there was a trial and I was charged pursuant to Article 216 of our penal code, where it refers to a possible sentence of 6 months up to 1 year for the denunciation of religion and faith. Turkey is a secular state, so there is no possibility of heresy being used in a trial of court. I was acquitted, and the state prosecutor appealed against the judgment, and despite of the fact that the court did not request anything, there was an opinion drafted which confirmed that in my novel there was no insult to Islam, yet there was a point made about an insult to all monotheistic religions. However, Turkey is becoming more and more conservative, and with a sort of Turkish spring, some countries believe that we might be a role model. I believe that we should start with ourselves before setting a role model. Of course, there is room for improvement as regards the freedom of expression in our country, even though there's been some improvement. Because recently, for example, there have been some journalists arrested and they are in detention at the moment. And there was an effort to destroy a book prior to its publication. The police forces broke into the house of Ahmet Şoför, the journalist who was the author of that book, and they wanted to destroy the book and prevent it from being published. And that reminds me of McCarthyism and the witch hunt, something that I thought is long past. As with the March of Janissaries, Turkey is moving westwards, and Janissaries moved in such a way that they made 1 step forward and 2 steps back, and that's the same way that Turkey as a country is moving on its way towards EU membership, because the values on which European Union is based should be appreciated by us, such as democracy, a secular state, human rights, democracy, etc. What is needed is that Turkey moves forward faster and doesn't make steps back. We've taken a little bit longer. I do apologize perhaps for questions which were too direct. Ladies and gentlemen in the audience, do you have any questions you'd like to ask?
If there are no questions, let me thank Mr. Gürsel for the reading of this passage. This book called The Conqueror should be out this year here in the Czech Republic. I would like to thank the festival for giving us this opportunity, and I would like